In this segment, we're going to take a look at using array fill to fill in an object. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and create a nice ellipse shape, and then I will select that shape and come over to the object properties. And so right now it's set for a running stitch outline and it has no fill. And what I'm going to do is maybe set my outline to be none, just for the time being, so that we can specifically focus in on what's filling in this shape. And we're going to choose array for the style of fill for the shape. And so it just takes a moment and my clip art library opens up, and that's what you can see here. Now these are items that have been preloaded or came with the software, and there's lots of things that you can choose from. So I'll go ahead and let's see if I can just scroll through this list and find just something like a simple shape would be good for demonstrating this. So I'll choose this curl and say insert. Now what I have to do is click my mouse and drag, and what I'm doing is setting the size of it. So if I click and drag, you'll see there's my curl, and I can sort of decide how big I want my curl to be in relationship to filling in this shape. So I'll choose something like, let's say, that. And so there you can see that the curl is now filling in this shape. So we selected an embroidery design from our clip art library, and we're using that design to fill our shape in. Now, because I've chosen array, I have some specific ways that I can control the array of this embroidery design, the way that it fills it in. So just to go over the different settings, first of all, you could offset that. So just like anything, if I want, I could offset it. Why don't we try offsetting it by, let's say, 3 millimeters, and you can see that it pushes it outside of the shape by 3 millimeters. You could do the same thing, -3, and it would push it to the inside. Or uncheck it and it turns it off. And while we're looking at the shape and the way it fills those in, notice here it says trim shapes, and if I uncheck that, the shapes as they apply are completed, and they're not trimmed by the shape of my object. And if you have this trim shapes selected, then it keeps those shapes from protruding outside of your oval or whatever shape your object is. Now I can also control the horizontal spacing, the vertical spacing, and the start angle. So right now they're all set at 0. If I change the horizontal spacing to, let's say, maybe we'll just make it 1 millimeter. Well, that's 10. I'll just do 1. So I changed the horizontal spacing, and I could change the vertical spacing. Why don't I make that 2 millimeters? So there you can see that I changed the vertical spacing and the horizontal spacing. The start angle, so it's set at 0. If I put that at 45, you'll see that it'll basically make the lines go on a bit of an angle. So this is going to change. This is shape fit, but there's other styles of ways to fill it in, and because I've changed these numbers in here, if I go and change the fill, it's going to try and remember those changes that I've made. In other words, it won't necessarily be the default settings that came up. If I create a new object, then it'll always start with the default settings, but as you make a change to the spacing or whatever, that tries to remember that as I go through. Now I'll just, maybe before I go through each one in detail, I wanted to just show the difference. So it started out with shape fit. If I choose rectangle, you'll see that it kind of puts it into nice sort of rows and columns. If I choose circular, it's going to apply that shape around my object in a bit of a circular pattern. If I choose contour, it's going to go around the shape and try and contour to my shape. If I choose single line, it's going to give us like a line sort of down the center of the shape. And we've seen shape fit where it fills out the shape. And then there would also be line fit, which is basically going to give you sort of rows and columns to fill that in. So there's different ways that you can apply this, and each one has different settings. So for example, if you go to line fit, then really the only thing you can control is going to be the offset. So whether you offset the shape or not, and what sort of horizontal spacing you want. So it's set at 1. If I change it to 0, it goes back to 0. So that's my only settings for line fit. Now if I go to single line, very much the same thing. I can only control the offset and the horizontal spacing. But if I change it to, let's say, contour, now I have the ability to change the horizontal and the vertical spacing. So right now my horizontal spacing is set at 0, so that's why each sort of object from one to the next along these lines are very close to each other, but it's still set with 2 millimeters for your vertical spacing, which if I wanted to I could make that, well, why don't we try 1 millimeter, and it'll give us closer, more rows. I end up with a whole extra row, I think, of these shapes. And if I set that to 0, you see what happens. It just tightens this whole thing up. So you have the ability to control these numbers. Now, follow angle, because I'm doing contour and my shape goes around, when I say follow angle, it keeps the shape in relationship to the line that it's following, always facing the same way. If I turn this off, then when it goes around, it won't change. It'll simply keep it at that, I guess, upright position all the way around, and so it changes the way that it sits along the line. So its follow angle is either on or off for contour. Now circular, when you go to circular, you have some different settings. So you have the horizontal spacing, which is set at 0, and you have your starting angle, which is this line here. What angle does it start on? Why don't I put that back to 0 as well? And you'll see it puts that back to 0. And then the number of steps. So imagine that there's my original, and then there's the first step, creates a circle, and my second step creates a circle, and this can be a little bit sort of easily noticed if I change my horizontal spacing to be a little bigger number. So what you see is, maybe I'll even go with 3. So each time I've done that, now we have further space between the rows. So how many steps? It's like this. Here's the center, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's sort of like the rays of a circle, and if I turn that up to be a larger number, I get more rays, and you can start to really see the circles or the rings. If I turn it down, I get less rays in my circular fill pattern. So I control all of these different settings for circular fill, and then the final one would be rectangle fill. And with rectangular fill, it's basically going to give you rows and columns, and I can control the offset, the horizontal spacing, which is set at 3. Why don't I change it back to 0? The vertical spacing, and I have the start angle, and then I have the slant angle. So 2 different settings for here. So right now my start angle is at 0. If I make that, let's say, 45, it's going to apply them along the 45 angle. My slant angle, so notice here the rectangular fill is very much set by rows, rows and columns. Now if I change my slant angle from 90, which is what gives it this 90-degree angle, to, let's say, 45, it moves that over, but what the end result is the overlapping rows of this object become overlapped, and it creates more of a continuous looking fill. So we have the ability to control in the rectangle the most, I guess, control over the way the pattern applies as regards to this rows and columns, because we can control the slant angle. Now, all of the things that I just showed that you can control within the numbers, we can also control visually by using this green angle line. And the way that we would do that is we would use the Edit Shape Nodes tool. So if I turn on Edit Shape Nodes now, notice that the little green angle got 3 little sort of buttons that you could select. And so just as an example, this button right out here is going to give me the ability to control this slant angle. So I'm going to click it and then drag, and I can choose where I want that to be. The distance of this angle, so if I click on this, I can make it further out, and that is in essence changing my vertical spacing, and the angle that I make with this controls my slant angle. So you can see here that I've got 5 millimeters vertical spacing and a slant angle of 89 based upon where I place this point. And then the horizontal spacing is going to be controlled with this point. And also at this point, I should be able to control the start angle. So if I move this down, see it turns both lines to control the start angle. So I can put that basically back at 0 or 359. So the start angle is this angle, and the slant angle is this angle. And so if I put it there, you can see I get that overlap. So it becomes, if you learn to use these handles, it becomes quite visual how you're applying the fill of this object as your array. So that's array fill, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of ways that you can control how to use it, and that's why I wanted to record an individual segment just for learning to use the array. And it's the same. So for example, if I go to circular, now I have, because I have edit shape nodes turned on, I have the ability to control these things mathematically or visually. So if I want to change the number of steps, I just simply change this. The angle of this is now controlling the number of steps in the design. You can see that you can make some very decorative styles of filling in your shape just with a simple little curl embroidery design. And this could be any you saw when I chose the array in the first place. If I click on it again, it allows me to choose a different shape to fill in for my array. And so if I just choose whatever, this little happy star or something, and click and drag to set its size, it's going to now apply the happy star in that shape as opposed to the little curl that I had. So that's what you've got, this choice for circular and all the different styles. So rectangular, circular, contour, single line, shape fit, and line fit are the different styles of array fill. Now I'm going to change the fill to be none, and I'm going to pop over to the outline and show that you can also choose to have an array for your outline. And so if I choose array for outline, I get the same little menu. So we could go ahead and choose the same little happy star and say insert. And again, I have to click and drag to set what the size of that little star design is going to be. And then when I do, it applies that star around the shape as the outline. So that's how you can do it. And again, I can control, basically in this case, I can just control the spacing between the two, each object, and I can offset it if I want. So if we wanted to, we could move this outside of our shape by 3 millimeters, and it would move the array 3 millimeters towards the outside. Now there's one more thing that you can do under the array toolbars that I haven't shown yet, and that's called separate to objects. And so right now, this whole shape or object, if I choose my select tool and select it, is one object. If I move it around, it all moves together. But if I choose separate to objects, I'll go ahead and choose that now, it takes all of those stars and separates them into individual objects, not even one embroidery design, but even the parts of the design of each object could be selected and therefore modified to be, well, whatever you want, bigger or stretched or rotated or whatever, how edit the points, whatever you want to do. So choosing separate to objects makes it no longer an array, and it actually just takes the embroidery design that was used as an array and breaks it into its individual pieces or elements. So yeah, that's, now let's see if I can get the original oval, which you see it no longer has an array outline. I could go ahead back to this and come back to the fill tab, choose array again, choose the curl or whatever again, and fill that in with an array all over again. And again, I still have that separate to objects option to break that. Now I've filled the background as an array and then broke that into individual objects, which are now each one of those objects could be selected, and you could do whatever you want, change the style of stitching or change the size or rotation or orientation of that object. So you can see there's lots of really creative things that you can do if you learn to use the array fill for your objects.